to the Deliberate Leader podcast. And this week, I'm so thrilled to be joined by Rhea Mercado. Rhea is the leading authority in all things healthcare, leadership. We're going to learn more about the Intelligent Rebellion, which is the organisation that Rhea runs. But Rhea is all about revolutionising organisational structures and fostering open forums to empower professionals to shape a brighter future, particularly in healthcare. I had the pleasure of working with Rhea just recently, actually, at a healthcare conference. So we had a lot of things in common. Trained as an exercise physiologist, injury management specialist, and now business owner, Rhea grasps the delicate balance between the mission of healthcare and the margin of business. So I love that around that commerciality. Having experienced occupational burnout herself and witnessing it in her colleagues, Rhea has shifted her focus from patients to professionals. You're the author of a book called, I love it, Rhea, Compo, a rehabilitation consultant's journey. I can't wait to hear more about that. And this inspired you to establish the Intelligent Rebellion and also Threesticks training and development, a safe space all about championing creativity and imagination, igniting impactful conversations and solutions. And I love this. So you're all about unleashing people's superpowers. So I reckon we've got a lot in common. As a speaker, which is why I wanted to bring Rhea on today, Rhea infuses dynamism, credibility, relatability, sass. There's plenty of that, and charisma, challenging audiences to ask better questions and to understand that they are capable of creating change. Rhea Mercado, welcome to the Deliberate Leader podcast.
Rita, thank you so much for having me. And I'm absolutely chuffed that I even got asked to come on board. So thank you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. We had a great time. It was a short time and a limited time because we were both very busy working, of course, last week at the National Healthcare Summit. But I really loved the energy that you brought. So we had the opportunity to share a panel discussion, and I loved it because you are passionate about healthcare, but you're also passionate about supporting professionals and leaders in healthcare. And I thought, yeah, we could probably jump on and have a conversation and try and reach some healthcare leaders that are listening today and really thinking about their deliberate leader journey and what helps them to be more deliberate. So, Rhea, tell us, maybe firstly, let's start with the Intelligent Rebellion. Tell us a little bit about that. How did that all come about?
Oh, look, that was can I say it's a happy accident? I don't think I know your podcast is called The Deliberate Leader, but I'm very much an accidental leader.
That's okay.
I think it's not something that I set out to do. And speaking to a friend, and it was the choiceless choice for me, Rita. And it really stemmed from, you mentioned in my bio in the intro that I've had an experience with burnout. And that moment is what ignited the Intelligent Rebellion. It was that exact moment where I sat down and I thought, what the heck is going on in my life? And why do I feel like I have to act and be a certain way just to kind of fit the mold of what I thought I was meant to be, to fit into what a leader is meant to look like, and to be to be the version of success that I was taught to be, or that I grew up thinking. And like you, I've listened to some of your episodes, and I'm a first generation migrant. And so I carry that migrant story with me. Your parents left absolutely everything, their families, their livelihoods, to give you a chance at a better life. And so you carry that burden on you to be all successful. And success means the nice car, the nice house, the fancy title, the massive bank balance. And I came to a point where I realized that that's not what I wanted. and that's that's where the rebellion came about. But I think in general, it describes me very well, because I think looking back at my life, I've been a bit of a rebel kid. Like, I think if you ask my mom, I've always been that kid that kind of never really did things the way that I was meant to do things. Or I always had the pull to be somewhat rebellious. And then I think, but not chaotic. I never wanted to go out and cause destruction. And I think often we think rebellion, we think destruction, and we think those things. But I think there's another really healthy rebellion that you can have. And I call it good trouble.
Yeah, I love that. So good trouble. And I love that distinction between rebellious. The word that comes to mind for me is that disruptive. And, sometimes there is a bit of chaos. It's that's created from that, but it's pushing the boundaries and doing things differently. Rhea, was that you as a kid? Like, is that who you've always been, or have you had people in your life that have shaped that way of thinking?
I definitely am my father's daughter. I think as I get to know my father as I age, I'm 40, I'm 40 this year. So as I got older and started to really listen to my dad's stories and understand him, I realized that he also questioned the way that things should be done. And that, I don't know, and especially, look, if I can just maybe bring it back to healthcare, is growing up in healthcare, we're taught very specific procedures. If someone has a shoulder injury, here's a protocol. There's a protocol for everything. There is a way to do something. There's a prescription to everything. And then when I was practicing, I thought, well, why can't we just do it this way instead? And it made me realize that those protocols are actually just guidelines and not rules. But I think I've always been allowed a freedom to explore. And I've got a safety net where I've got a very core group of people that I know and I love and I trust. So I have what I call a home base, which allows me to then feel really safe in that place, and be really safe around the people that I hold close, so that I can go out and I can go and explore. And if, you know, if things turn to shit, I've always got a place to land.
Yeah.
And so I think to answer that question is, I think it's a combination of me just as a personality, really curious, exploratory, like to play. I'm very playful. And then also being able to have people that I can rely on and fall back on when things don't turn out the way I expect them to.
Yeah, I think that helps. Having that mindset, no doubt, helps. It's almost a natural resilience, like a natural fallback position that if things do turn to custard, that's okay. Like I know that I've got the home base, as you talk about, that safety net, but also it's within you. So it's both relying on others, but also then relying on self. Rhea, I have a question for you in relation. So as a healthcare professional, because I work with lots of them, and it's sometimes surprising to me and sometimes not that there is an assumption from others that are not in healthcare that healthcare kind of has their shit sorted when it comes to leadership, when it comes to, you know, culture, when it comes to all that kind of stuff. And I think often it's, as you say, you know, you're diagnosing, you're prescribing, you've got an answer for how to fix stuff. In the experience that you've had, you know, in working with different healthcare leaders and also being one yourself and starting off as an exercise physiologist, how does it feel for you when you're like, I've got it, you know, you talked about your journey into leadership as an accidental leader and maybe not a deliberate one, but how has it felt for you when, gosh, I don't know what the answer is here, you know, I don't know how to solve this leadership issue. How have you dealt with that when you've been faced with it?
If you were to rewind to Rhea, young 20-year-old, bright-eyed leadership Rhea, in a way that is traditionally leadership, or what I thought was leadership, I would have just faked it till I made it. You kind of then go within yourself and just think, I'm going to just have the bravado, have the confidence. And if you have enough confidence and you show that to the world, then maybe people will really truly start to believe you. What I've learned over time, over the last 10 years, is that we're actually just all making it up as we go along. And there is a freedom and a power to that. And I think this is where I start encouraging people to explore and to explore themselves, to explore their organizations, and to imagine and that it's in fact okay. Look, fail is one of those words that seems so negative, but I think it's so important to explore and find the ways that don't work. But you're not going to be able to do that until you're not going to find the ways that work until you find the ways that don't work. And so that the way I found to answer your question is, it's just a lot of play for me. And it's just a really curious mindset is the way that I sort of work my way through it. And also being able to say out loud and confidently out loud is, you know what, guys, I don't know. Let's work through it.
There's that confidence and conviction comes with that, I think, because you've, you know, not knowing that, particularly in healthcare where it's hard not to know, because you're paid and you're valued to know. And so when you're dealing with leadership challenges, team culture, engagement, whatever it might be, sometimes I think as healthcare leaders, we apply that same thinking, which is, well, I've got to know the answer because I know the answer in every other domain of my profession.
Yeah. And I think, Rita, when we think about the people who rise to the leadership ranks in healthcare, we all started off as healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
So we're not these deliberate leaders. We didn't go to business school. We didn't learn about running businesses. We're all very accidental leaders in healthcare. And so when we fundamentally think about the reason why we are healthcare professionals, it's because we wanted to help people.
Yeah.
It's not because we wanted to run businesses. And I've done a lot of reflection upon sort of my own journey and other people's journey and the question that I come down to ultimately is, what do I think, or what do you think is the role of a healthcare professional? And you've pointed to that, Rita, where you said, as a patient, as someone who's a consumer of healthcare, I go to somebody so that I can be fixed because I've got a problem. I rely on them to be all-knowing, to give me solutions, to fix me, to heal me, to restore me. When in reality, I truly believe that the role of a healthcare professional is to give people the information that they want, when they want it, so that they can make decisions about their own healthcare. Now, let's pivot that around to being a leader in healthcare. My role as a leader in healthcare is to give people the information that they want, that they need to make decisions about their workflow and their job in the way that they feel that it needs to be done and can be done. So I think we often forget, and this is where that real disconnect happens with healthcare and healthcare leaders, is that the way that we approach how we work with our patients is the skills are completely transferable, and the capabilities are there to then work with our colleagues and lead our colleagues. It's the same set of skills.
It's such a good point. You talk about that transferable skill, because at the end of the day, it's easy to misdiagnose when you're not listening to your patient. So we can look at something on the surface and go, well, I think it's this, and therefore here's the script, here's the whatever. But it's why we spend so much time with patients, really understanding, asking them questions, getting a sense of where their concern is, and that is information then that's calibrated with the expert opinion around then making a diagnosis. So I agree with you. There's lots of transferable skill between that, like patient liaison work and patient work, but then also working with our teams. And we also see that in healthcare in particular, we've got, in this country at the moment, but it's a global issue, not just an Australian issue. We've got huge issues with retention. We've got people leaving the workforce in droves and choosing to do other things. A lot of that is burnout, which we spoke about just in the beginning and the intro in terms of the work that you do. And it's getting really hard. It's getting hard. We've got workforces that are feeling overworked. We've got workforce strategy issues. We've got different types of challenges in the community, which means we're dealing with more complex health issues perhaps than what we've dealt with before. From your perspective, Rhea, the leaders that you see that are doing a damn good job in healthcare, you don't have to name names, but what do you see that helps them stand out against others? Like, what are they doing differently to others that are just kind of on struggle city in relation to leadership?
To leadership, I think number one is starting to, so the leaders that I see that, say, when we look at directors or owners of businesses, and I don't work with large corporations because a lot of the healthcare industries are very small mum and dad businesses, right? What I see is they actually realize that maybe leadership or management is not something that they're good at or something that they're interested in. And so they employ people externally who do have those leadership skills, who did go to school or skilled up in actual people management, change management, and then that way they can go back to them being technically what they wanted to do, which was to help people and to treat people. And so I think some of the most successful healthcare businesses I've seen are the ones that outsource their leadership. And it's not what people want to hear out there, but hey, is that even a role? And I'm very much along the trifecta of a healthy organization. And that trifecta is the right skills, the right person, right, in the right role.
Yeah.
And if you can't get that trifecta, then you're not going to have a healthy organization. And so for me, my personal story is that I think there was about failures, and I think you asked me a question. We had a bit of a question about failures. Is one of my biggest failures is not acknowledging, accepting, or admitting sooner that maybe I don't want to be in a traditional leadership position. That doesn't mean that I can't lead. It just means that the role that I'm expected to be a leader in is probably not the type role, the right type of role for me.
So that's about being able to use, I'm hearing there, the capabilities and competencies that you've got, still being able to leverage those, but not using them in a traditional leadership role.
That's right. Yeah. So finding a different type of role for them. And one of my favorite, when you try to define what leadership is, and I wish I remember where I read this, because I would love to credit the person that wrote it. But I'll read that. And it's basically leadership is a process of social influence which maximizes the efforts of others towards achievement of a goal. And when you look at that from a broad sense, it doesn't say you have to be at the pinnacle or a CEO. It doesn't define an actual title. All it's asking there is to influence, to maximize efforts of others to achieve a goal. Yeah. And if we define leadership as that, then I think everybody has an opportunity to be a leader and to lead.
Yeah. And I really love that quote. You should just claim it, Rhea. If there's no, I'm joking. Don't claim it. Always full attribution.
You can claim it.
No, I shall not. But full attribution, right? To whoever it was, they shall be anonymous right now. Mm-hmm. But I love the bit that I love most about that is you're connecting people into a goal. And so when you said a little early on, like when we go in as healthcare leaders, we're doing it often because we want to help people. I think you said, we're not doing it because we want to run businesses or run departments. Mm-hmm. We've got a passion to be able to help people and support their health. Mm-hmm. And so if we can connect our people into that goal and be reminding them of that, what we're doing as a small team, a department, an organization, doesn't matter about the size of our organization, connecting them back in, then by virtue of that, you're leading or you're on your way to leading.
Yeah, and in the danger of not opposing, but questioning Simon Sinek and his why, I think who is a bigger question.
Yeah.
Especially in healthcare.
Yeah.
Who is our why? And we at the Workforce Summit, we heard from Elizabeth, who is a student or was a student resident, and she spoke about that every healthcare professional has somebody that they hold in their front pocket. We all have that one patient that is our who. It's not our why, it's our who. And I think kind of reframing that very specifically for healthcare. If you ask them, why I want to help people, but if you ask who do you want to help, they'll give you 100 stories about some patient that they saw early in their career, late in their career, or just yesterday.
Yeah, and that connects into patient-centered care, which we hear, most health facilities here in Australia in some way, shape or form will have patient-centered care right at the heart of either their vision, their mission, their objectives, their strategic plan. We've got patient-centered in there. So I reckon that's a really nice distinction, and it builds maybe on the reason Simon Sinek really became very famous, which was the start with the why. But you're right, it is with that who. And I guess we could extend that who into our teams. So you will have no doubt seen a lot in your career around cultures that perhaps are not so healthy in healthcare. Fancy that. Healthcare without the health, So when you see cultures that look a little bit sick, maligned, what do you reckon is contributing to that from what you see from your perspective?
Look, there's an irony. There's an irony in that for people who want to help people, we actually fail to help one another. And that just absolutely blows my mind. And that's why I started the Intelligent Rebellion. That's why I started having these conversations, is let's go patient second. That has probably made a few people shudder.
Yeah, tell us more.
But so patient second is, let's bring it back to an analogy that people are more familiar with, which is that you and I get on planes a lot. They tell you to put your mask on first so that you're full of oxygen and vigor to be able to go and help other people. We need to do the exact same, right? Without healthy healthcare workers, we are going to have an unhealthy healthcare business. And let's admit to the fact that healthcare is a business. So number one, the biggest, I think, what happens in culture and society is that we just expect healthcare workers, like teachers or social workers or anybody who does any type of care work, to just be in it for the love of it. Heck, you love it. We won't pay you anything. Just do it because you love it. And that, I think, is probably the largest danger to our workforce. And when we talk about the cultures that are, dare I say, toxic or don't have the healthiest culture, it's because I think they lean too much into that. They lean too much in that, oh, well, you love your job, so just do an extra shift. Or we want you to be healthy and happy, but would you mind just covering so-and-so's night shift because they're sick today? And so the cultures that we're finding where people are burning out or disengaged, or people just aren't showing up anymore or leaving the industry outright, which is the worst case scenario, is because the talk doesn't match the action. Right.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because I think instinctively we know what we need to do, but then the practical operations of running a really busy health facility, whatever it is, whether it's a GP clinic, a physiology, a physio practice, whatever it is, a myotherapist, a hospital, we get into the rut of operations and not being deliberate, I think, around how we're leading. So it's an interesting, point that you make there about we've got to have healthy healthcare workers. Otherwise, we're creating, these unhealthy cultures.
Yeah, and I think it's, if we don't care for our healthcare workers, then we will become the patients.
Yeah, which we're already seeing.
Definitely seeing. And it is, and trying to find them. We spoke about trying to find the mission of healthcare and balancing that with the margin of business. I think it's highly possible to do both. I see lots of companies that can actually do both of those things, and all the research is out there about if you care for your workers, you have engaged workers, they're going to be X amount times more productive, more healthy, and more profitable. Let's be real, we're all trying to run businesses here. And so I think that the other danger is on that point is that if we could just admit to the fact that we all are trying to make money because we all trying to profit and trying to make and trying to have a business, I think let's stop faking and pretending that it's all about the lovey-dovey. And this is where my pragmatic side comes out a little bit is, yeah, it's great that we want to help the world. And it's wonderful that we want to be able to care for other people and we've got our who's. At the same time, we need to make money because we need to pay our way. We need to meet our survival needs. And if this business crashes and burns, then I can't help people into doing that. But I think leaders need to be really honest about that. I think they need to be really upfront about it. By the way, it takes X amount of money to run this business, and you need to do X amount to be able to keep the doors open and keep your job. And I think I know that healthcare don't really like to talk too much about that because they think it's a bad thing. They think profiting and making money is like profiting off sick people, and they think it's really dirty. And I don't. I think it's actually really healthy.
Yeah, and I mean, the other point that comes to mind there is that you mentioned before outsourcing leadership, and and people may have some questions marks around that, right? Like, how do you outsource leadership? But at the end of the day, when we're looking at large enough healthcare facilities that have administrators and professional services staff that are running the facility, you're putting those people in because they're really good at operationally and strategically running a business, and you're allowing your healthcare staff to do what they do best. I think that works, and it's quite a simplistic division of duties and responsibilities. Where I reckon it gets mucky is where you've got clinical staff needing to lead teams And so to some extent, you know, they might not be involved in the full commercials of the business, but they will be involved in trying to lift up performance, keep performance at a particular level, you know, training, development, coaching conversations, all those things, which are then not something that you can separate off, I think. I think it's part of the role. In your experience, so tell us a little bit more about that, you know, outsourcing leadership. Where have you seen that organizations and people have been able to some extent, outsource? And also, where have you seen them fully integrate that leadership role, if you like, in with their healthcare role?
Yeah, and I think where and yeah, to that, like if you've got a big organization and you kind of can bring in those change managers, those strategic leaders and things like that. So I've just had a thought, and I love that you've kind of highlighted to me. I was like, oh, actually, yeah, that let me just sit on it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So let me just have a bit of a think about it.
Yeah.
So let's flesh this out. Yeah. This is me emerging and exploring. Let's have a play.
I love it.
Rita.
I love it, Rhea.
So I'm thinking now that like you've kind of really you've kind of said that out loud. What I was really looking at is the companies that have made a decision that someone might start off as a clinical healthcare practitioner or a technician, and I've seen this in businesses, and what they've actually done is they've taken that person away from the hands-on on the tools type of work and identified them as having the leadership qualities and the want, and then teaching them how to be a leader. So sending them to courses, upskilling them a little bit, maybe sending them to do MBAs. And we see a lot of that within healthcare, where you've got people who have a healthcare, allied health background or a healthcare background who were on the tools, then upskilling themselves in that. So maybe with the outsourcing, I think maybe that would have been the wrong or not the right description that I gave. But you're basically pulling somebody out from the tools and then teaching them leadership skills and then bringing them back into the company kind of in a different role.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So they're really deferring the learning bit until they need it. Yeah.
Yeah. But there are instances, again, with the larger companies where you do have people who bring in someone who is a change manager or a business person who will do the strategic planning. But I think there's also a skill set in when I've seen companies who bring people in who don't have an allied health background, who have a purely business administration background. And what that does, it actually increases the diversity in the workforce. Because if you have someone who doesn't really understand your industry, but is very good at understanding business, they also don't know the perceived limitations of how a healthcare business should run.
Yeah.
And I think that diversity in perspectives is what some of the companies that I've seen who've done that have actually just taken off from both a business perspective and also from being able to care for their professionals and for their employees and keep the retention in their workforce. Because you have someone there who actually knows how to run a business.
Yeah.
Like healthcare people, we don't know how to run a business. Like, I mean, basic, probably the very simple things, but let's be real, like that's not where our skill set lies.
Yeah, and it's such a good point around diversity. So I often will refer to that as the cognitive diversity in the team. So making sure that you've got people that do represent different views, not just to challenge, but also it's just more to add. So we can kind of go challenge, and that opposes a view against another view and creates almost a competitive environment, or one that's potential for conflict. But if we think about it around, well, we bring this diversity of thought in so we can actually grow different ideas when we have a different level of ingredients. My food is pretty bland if I'm just going to use salt and pepper, but if I'm chucking a few other flavors in, then all of a sudden the dish takes on a different richness that it would have had, if I just put in salt and pepper. So
Yeah. And I think to that point, imagine if you were trying to cook, say, a fish, and you're just putting salt and pepper, but another ingredient, and you've always cooked it in the grill, like you've always just grilled it, and some person comes and goes, you know what? You can actually cook it on the barbecue.
Yeah, exactly.
That will shake up an organization, and that person might be, I'm an expert at barbecuing. So let's try that. And so I think the companies that are able to like shift and evolve, then look, we can talk about change during COVID all day long. But the organizations that were the most successful coming out of COVID were the ones with the diversity in their workforce. because everybody approached that problem so differently. And the ones who were like, oh, how about this? Or how about that? Or how about this? Or how about that? And not just down the very healthcare line, were able to just adapt. And people, I know people who actually started businesses during COVID. Actually, Intelligent Rebellion kind of started during COVID, like properly started during COVID.
Yeah. I think it provided people time and space to think, you know, maybe an idea that they wanted to bring to light. But also that, you know, that adapting piece. There were, you know, gin distilleries that were producing hand sanitizer and coffee companies, you know, producing hand sanitizer because that was the need, right? So people, and it was the need that come out of necessity. So usually great inventions and innovation comes out of necessity. But it also gave people time and space to think about a different approach. So using, you know, utilizing diverse thinking either within them or getting brains trusts around them to try and bring about that diverse thinking.
Yeah, because I think if you want diversity, it has to be, you're not going to know it all. And if you think you know it all, then you probably don't know it all, and nobody likes a know-it-all. Right. And you can't, I think as much as you and I like to try, we like to absorb as much information as we can, but we just can't hold it into our brain. It's just not possible to do that. So you can almost build, when you think about if you imagine like your dream organization, what you want it to look like, it's, you know, back to your cooking analogy, is you need all the different ingredients, but you're not able to source, like you don't have all those ingredients. You need people to come in and do that. And I think a lot of companies that fail to invest in what they don't see as a billable, like billable hours is a big thing that happens in our industry, or session hours is, you know, we've got to make money. And so everybody in the organization needs to be able to bill, has to be able to see a patient or see a client. I think there needs to be a lot more investment in the people who are off the tools, who are doing that thinking, who do have the skills to be creative and imaginative and see the larger strategic vision of a company, and then let the people who are technicians just go about and do their thing. And in small healthcare businesses and practices, is you've got 2 or 3 people who are doing the same thing, like who are doing all those things at once. And so that's where they don't actually evolve or grow, and they're stuck at the status quo. And so they're not going to be successful, healthy businesses.
They're full of risk. Rhea, as you were developing, so given your experience, and it's extensive, and now your own business, as you've been developing in what I call the leadership lanes. So what I mean by that is, you know, we go from just like a swimming pool, you know, slow lane, medium lane, fast lane. What helped you work out what you needed as you moved through your leadership lanes?
I am a big believer in intuition. And intuition being that you don't know why you know something, but you know that it feels good or it feels wrong.
Yeah.
And I think as humans, we generally have a good intuition, and we tend to ignore it a lot of the time because we think that we have to be a certain way. There's this expectation upon us. So what has really helped me kind of make those decisions is very simply, and it sounds super simplistic, is I just do what makes me smile.
Yeah.
And if I think about changing lanes, you know, and it is from that sort of the fast lane to the medium lane to the slow lane. If I think about changing through those lanes, the only question I ask myself is, does this make me feel sad? Or does this make me feel happy? Or does it make me, not even happy, does it make me smile? Okay, it's making me smile, then I know I know for right now it's the right move.
Yeah.
And once it stops making me smile, then I'll go somewhere else and do something else.
Yeah.
Super simplistic, but it works. And the other thing that I talk often about is the dream. So the dream and exit strategy is something that people don't often think. We think about getting into business and leadership, but we forget what the exit strategy is a lot of the time. And so my decision making is based very much on what I call the dream. And there are these 3 things that I'm really working towards on a meta scale. And those 3 things are basically to go snowboarding whenever I want. to have agency over my own time, to choose what I want to do with my time, and not to take off, not to take shit up from anybody.
Yeah.
And so when I'm choosing if I'm going to change lanes, or I'm taking an opportunity to be true to myself, I need to make sure that those 3 things are ticked off, because we like shiny things. And if that shiny thing doesn't allow me to do those things, then it's a shiny thing that I'm not allowed to have.
Yeah.
And second to that is just core values. Is, I think, really establishing what your core values and what your non-negotiables are as a person. And if you are starting to think about changing lanes, are they meeting your core values, your who, or your why? And if they're not, then that's a pretty easy decision to make.
I think some of those things that you point out there, and I'd never really thought of that exit strategy for leadership, but because you're right, we often and I love your phrase at the start, which was, I was a choiceless leader, right? So we often get into leadership roles, particularly in healthcare and highly technical industries, because we're very good at what we do. It's not always a deliberate leadership path. As you said, many of us and many healthcare professionals have not studied, formal leadership development. It's something you learn on the job, which is full of risk, because if you're blessed with a great leader, then awesome, you'll learn great strategies and techniques that then you will use. But if you are unfortunate to work with someone who's not that great, which we know happens, and it happens a lot, then you may not always know to distinguish between what's successful and what's not, because sometimes those really poor leadership practices gets results as much as we don't enjoy those the process of getting that result. So I think having an exit strategy and knowing when to go, what, this is not a path that I want to take is super important. I love there what you said about your dreams. It connects in with what you were talking about before with your purpose. So if you're purpose driven, and things that make you smile, the things that make us smile are often those things that push our desires and that we want to do. So snowboarding, I imagine, would be you jumping on a plane a lot, or colder parts in Australia. But agency over time, you said not taking shit from anyone. Which for you and I and people in our own businesses, I think it's easier for us to do that because we're captains of our own ship. How do you see that working with your healthcare professionals? So your nurse unit manager, your head of physio in a healthcare facility, your maternal health nurse. How do you see those practices and principles working for your healthcare professional that's working somewhere as opposed to working for themselves?
And this is going to sound super controversial, so I'm just going to preface that.
Go for it.
It's about deliberate decision making. You speak about deliberate leadership, deliberate decision making. If you can understand what your values are, what your exit strategy is, what your dream is, you will find the right place that will help you turn up the volume on that. Now, we often talk about the workforce. Oh my gosh, there is 100% a workforce crisis. On the flip side, Rita, that means that there are a lot of people out there who are healthcare providers who can choose. You have a choice. You have not always, I'm speaking generally, but you have a choice to choose who you want to work for. Right? If there is a workforce crisis, then it's incumbent upon the employers and the leaders of those companies to make themselves very attractive to prospective employees. And so when we talk about the nurses who are, how do we kind of look? I used to be an employee, so I completely understand what it's like to be held to account, or to have my values to have a gap between my personal values and what the organization has wanted me to do. And I actually quit my job. Now, I'm not saying that that's the solution. For me, that was the solution. But I think you can make those deliberate decisions as to where your non-negotiables are. And even what I've noticed though is there are rules up here. But when you start to work with little small teams, even in the big organizations, they have their house rules. Within themselves, they're caring for one another. Right. They're deliberately being intelligently rebellious. They've started their own little rebellions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's my advice to anybody is the core people that you work with day to day, just start your own little personal rebellions. Don't break rules. I'm not saying to break rules, but create your own little house rules. And you can sort of, that's how you can create change just within your little world. And then at some stage, maybe that ripple effect, that change will actually move more into the organization and hit the people and the leadership. Or you never know, your colleague might become one of those leaders and they're going to be able to influence that change.
So what I'm hearing there is rather than seeing culture as something that comes down from the top and it's set strategically, which it can, what I'm hearing there is almost focusing on your subculture, or I love that concept of house rules, but get that really tight. And if you can create some alignment between the organization, then great. But well, we know, all people leave organizations primarily because of their relationship with their leader. Right. So it makes sense, right? That if we're working on our house rules, our subculture, we get that really tight, we get it working for us, then maybe there is more chance of that engagement and connection, and us experiencing a positive culture, even if it is at a local level.
Yeah, and there's a really great example of that with one of the companies who is a workplace rehab provider. And when you look at the overall arching sort of strategic plan of the business, and it's one of those businesses where it looks unattractive to work for, and people do leave because they're asked to do things or to work in a way that is so malaligned with their values as healthcare providers or carers. But when you look at the sub teams, like the really local teams, they have this amazing culture that allows them to align all those values. So they've created a little rebellion in themselves. They've created house rules that allow them to be able to play and to meet both the mission and the margin. So they're a high performing team from a productive perspective, from a profit perspective, but also from an engagement perspective and an outcome perspective. Right? And that's a really true example of, yeah, they're doing stuff up there, but we can also do things down here.
Yeah. Yeah. And make it work. Yeah, I really like that, Rhea. I think that's good advice for anyone. We can get pretty down about cultures that don't support either what we want to do or that just don't make us feel good. And I think in an organization, sometimes it's really hard to feel that you can change that. But I think the advice there that I'm hearing, and I think this will resonate for people, is you've got control over your subculture, your house rules, focus on that first. And then that may ripple out. And even if it doesn't, concentrate on your patch and kind of, where you're at and where your team's at.
Yeah.
Nice one. Rhea, as you've developed, in your leadership journey, what's one bit of advice that you wish you had received maybe a little earlier, but is advice that maybe you impart on other leaders, particularly in healthcare now?
I think the best, I wish someone had told me, it's okay to say no.
Yeah.
Like, totally cool. By the way, if you can't do that, that's fine. would have been really nice. But I think the other thing is, the advice that I would give to anybody would be truly lean into your intuition and what you think is a good thing to do. And whatever the outcome of that, I think you can always just go home and go to bed and go, I did a good thing today. And it may have shaken a few feathers, or it may have not met the organizational blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, you're replaceable. As a leader, as an employee, you're wholly replaceable. And that's a really harsh reality. And I think, especially in healthcare, it's not my responsibility how other people act. It's my responsibility to make sure that I act in a way that is true to my values, true to being a good human. I think that's all that anybody can really do. And the other thing I think is we all want to go out and change the world. And I wish someone had told me that to be able to change the world is, again, going back to can you change the interactions that you have every single day with every single person, and can you make those interactions as positive as healthy, as caring as you possibly can.
Yeah. And that comes to, that we talked about patient-centered care, but it also links back nicely to what you talked about with the who, and really having that person that you're interacting with, that person you're connecting with, whether it's patient or a member of your team, but having that at the forefront, being really present, not just there in physical form, but actually being there.
Yeah. And change is not monumentous. I think we often think that, to change the world, I have to be a president, or I have to be this. No, actually, to change the world, you can smile at somebody today.
Yeah.
And you haven't changed the world, but you may have changed a world.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. And that's a golden rule that you live by, Rhea, which is it making me smile, which I love. Hey, Rhea, thanks so much for joining the conversation today. I've learnt a lot about leadership in healthcare. It's a different, a different point of view, and your experience, what it's demonstrated to us is that by, first and foremost, being true to yourself, having some really good values and principles in place, does create choice. And often in healthcare, we can feel that choice is not there for us because we are there in service of the community, in service of patients, in service of our healthcare institutes. But there is choice for us in all that. And I think it's been a good reminder today. So thank you so much for being on the Deliberate Leader podcast, Rhea.
I very much appreciate it, Rita. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. And we'll pop all Rhea's links in the show notes so you can get a little bit more information about Rhea's businesses and what she does in the Intelligent Rebellion. Thanks again.
Thanks, Rita.